Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final African Literature Association lecture series for 2024. We have a wonderful roundtable set up for you. Before I go into those details, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are beaming in from. As in the past, if you'd like to introduce yourself and say who you are and where you're from, that would be most welcome. You can do so in the chat, and thank all of you. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. My name is JOYA URAIZEE. I am the past president of ALA, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our panel for today, which is ALA at 50, Past Presidents Speak. As you know, ALA as an organization is turning 50 this year. So for our last panel for this year, we have decided to ask several past presidents of ALA to talk to us about their experiences. We have a series of wonderful past presidents here for you. I will take a few minutes to introduce each of them, and then we will have a series of questions that I will pose to them, after which we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So first, I'd like to introduce Professor ALIKO Songolo, who is currently visiting Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is also Professor Emeritus in the Department of French and Italian and the Department of African Cultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. At Wisconsin, he served as director of the African Studies program, chair of the Department of French and Italian, and numerous other very high administrative positions. He is a wonderful scholar. I don't have time to go into all of his publications, but they include such texts as Aimé Césaire, Un poétique de la découverte, apologies for my French, several co-edited volumes, including 25 Years After Dakar and Fura Bay, and Atlantic Cross Currents Transatlantiques, as well as numerous articles and other books. He has been a Fulbright Fellow in Cameroon, France, and Senegal, and was ALA president twice, from 1982 to 1983, and then again from 1992 to 1993. We also have, unfortunately, the next roundtable panelist, Professor Carole Boyce-Davies, isn't here with us today, but just to say a few things about her. She is the Frank H.T. Rhodes Professor of Humane Letters and Professor of Africana Studies and Literatures in English at Cornell. She's held distinguished professorships at a number of institutions. Her publications are also too numerous to enumerate here. A few of them are Black Women Writing and Identity, The Political Life of Black Communist Claudia Jones, as well as numerous scholarly articles and critical anthologies, such as Ngambika, Studies of Women in African Literature, and Out of the Kumla. She has co-edited numerous works, including Decolonizing the Academy, and has numerous other publications. She was ALA president between 2000 and 2001. Next, we have Professor Lokangaka LOSAMBE, who is the Frederick M. and Fannie CP Corse Professor of English at the University of Vermont. He has taught at numerous universities in Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Swaziland, and South Africa. His publications, like the others, are too numerous to give details of all of them, but he has, for example, Post-Colonial Agency in African and Diasporic Literature and Film, an Introduction to African Prose Narrative, the Visual Arts and Globalization in Africa, and its diaspora, and has edited numerous books such as Pre-Colonial and Post-Colonial Drama and Theater in Africa. He is also, of course, co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of New African Diasporic Literature. He was ALA president between 2012 and 2013. Next, we have Professor MORADEWUN ADEJUNMOBI, who is a professor of African and African American Studies at the University of California, Davis. Her published work includes J.J. Rabievelo, Literature and Lingua Franca in Colonial Madagascar, Vernacular Palaver, Imaginations of the Local and Non-Native Languages of West Africa, among other things. Her interests are in African screen media and textual culture. She has wide-ranging interests there, and currently she's focused on multilingualism and the circulation trajectories of African popular film, fantasy, and science fiction. She was ALA president between 2015 and 2016. And last but not least, we have Professor Juliana Makuchi NFAH-ABBENYI, who is the Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature, Associate Dean of Faculty and Staff Development and Success in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at North Carolina State University. She is a literary critic, an essayist and writer, widely published in African and African diaspora literatures, post-colonial literary and cultural studies, and women's and gender studies. She's the author of Gender in African Women's Writing, Identity, Sexuality, and Difference, Your Madness, Not Mine, Stories of Cameroon, The Sacred Door and Other Stories, and was also co-editor of Reflections on an Anthology of New Work by African women poets. She writes fiction under the pen name Makuchi, and her short story, Land of My Dreams, was selected for honorable mention at the 2023 Best Short Story Award category of ALA. She was ALA president between 2016 and 2017. So we have illustrious past presidents here with us, and I'll start off by pointing out that as I pose these questions, since this is a roundtable, each of these past presidents will answer. We'll start in each case with Professor Songolo, since he was president earliest, and move our way down to Professor LOSAMBE, ADEJUNMOBI, with Professor NFAH-ABBENYI finishing us up in each case. After this, as I mentioned earlier, audience members can post questions in the chat, and they will be happy to answer those. So my first question to our distinguished panel is, what was ALA like when you were president? How large was it? What kinds of members did it have? And what, anything else you can tell us about ALA's past history? And again, I'd like to start with Professor Songolo.
All right. Thank you very much. Should I be seen or not?
Yes, you are visible, I believe.
Okay. Yes, the questions seem simple and straightforward, with answers that should be just as forward or straightforward. But what makes them difficult, at least for me, is the fact that the ALA does not have searchable archives to go back to recall all those details, such as kinds of members, kinds of conferences, and so forth. I joined the ALA in 1976 at the Northwestern Conference, which, if I remember correctly, at the time, as it continued for a while, the conferences were being organized on campus. Now we are in hotels. If I remember correctly, Dennis Brutus was the president, or at least the organizer then, in 1976 when I joined. We were more informal as an organization, and membership was open to all those who were interested in African literature, including graduate students and independent researchers. They were more informal than they are now. And I would guess that the membership was somewhat limited to about 200. It's a pity that Eileen Julian is not here because I think she was there at the very beginning, 2 years before, in 1974, and she could provide more details. But by 1976, we had some kind of form and shape. If I remember correctly, also, the conferences themselves, that is, the sessions, took place quite often in classrooms. And one of the objectives was to invite writers, as many as we could, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And those writers were invited to classes and spoke in the classes in order to get the ALA to be known as widely as possible. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Professor Songolo. Professor LOSAMBE. Professor LOSAMBE, yes.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Okay. I first became a member of the ALA when I was in Nigeria. At that point, I was teaching at Ondo State University in towards the late 80s. And at that point, most of us tried to garner all the resources we could to have access to all what was happening at the ALA, not necessarily attending, but being members and getting the bulletins and keeping in touch with our colleagues who were here. And then when I came here, the first thing I did was to organize a major conference in 2009. And at that conference, we had Wole Soyinka, who was one of the keynote speakers. We also had Apia Modimbe, Pius Ngandu, Magdalena Odundo, Zekinda, and Michael Echero. And so we had really a line, very of distinguished lineup of distinguished speakers. And we had really, we could count over 600 participants. It was really a very an excellent event in Vermont, especially when it is a very much white university, white area in New England here. And after the conference, everyone will ask me, wow, we saw so many people with boo-boo and all sorts of attires, and they were very, very happy. We even had Wole Soyinka to visit some classes, which really, delighted our students very much. And it was after that, a couple of years, that I became the president of the association. And I started, I became president at Ohio University in Athens, when Negesha and others organized that conference there. At that time, the association was, as an activist organization, every time a person became a president, we were interested very much in what was happening on the continent, but also the state of our discipline, African literature, in the United States here and other areas in Europe, as many people were coming from there. And during that time, there was a certain malaise, really, during when I came in as president. A number of Department of Black Studies and modern language departments were facing shrinking resources, and some of them really were being threatened with the closure. People were losing positions. And at that time, we had really to start, you had to try and see how we could be creative in maintaining our teaching of African literature here in the United States, for instance, how to integrate ourselves in departments like comparative literature, post-colonial studies, and global studies to make sure that we have African literature in those spaces so that we could still keep those positions. At that time, also in terms of membership, we came into a situation where many African Americans and African Caribbeans, the members of the old diaspora, were kind of retreating from the ALA as the new diaspora expanded. And so it was clear that apart from Eileen and Anna Adams and others, Fahmisha, we were no longer attracting a large number of African American scholars. And so one of the things I did when I was president at that time was that I was going to try to go to some of cognate organizations like Black Studies, African American Studies, and try to encourage them to have to be coming into the ALA as we would be going there as well. The same time also the ALA was frustrated with the ESC, and again they had decided at a certain point to withdraw from the ESC. And so I had to try to get us back there as well. And so during that time, really, we had the challenges. It was also a time when we had on the continent, Arab Spring was starting. And it had started in Tunisia, and it was spreading to Libya and Sudan, and Egypt. And at that time, we were very much, encouraged, and we were encouraging. We didn't know why. We didn't at that time anticipate that it will end up the way it ended with the destruction of Libya and the failure there in Egypt. And so we were enthusiastic, and all had to do something about that. The Sudan situation, also the conflict there was taking place. And so there were many problems on the continent, just as we are facing problems here. And it was at that point as a president that I had to write a letter to President Obama, to which he responded. And we have that letter. I think we have archived. The letter is there. His response is there. And he was very much encouraging in his response, saying that he was going to he was paying attention to the happenings on the continent. And so these are the challenges that we had during our time. But I will talk again later on probably about the state of the discipline if we have the time. I'll stop there now.
Thank you very much, Professor LOSAMBE. Professor ADEJUNMOBI.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who are watching today. In response to the question that was asked, I'll just be brief. I joined the African Literature Association sometime in the 1990s. The first conference I attended was in Texas, in Austin, Texas, which was a great place to start attending ALA conferences, since that was a place, the birthplace of the African Literature Association. What was the ALA like at the time when I was president? One of the things that Professor Songolo said in his response was that it was difficult to know how many members the ALA had at the time he was president, because there weren't archives. And I would say that the major thing that I was involved with when I became president was an attempt to increase the institutionalization of the African Literature Association as an association. And I did this because my understanding is that we have scholars who are working in different fields and who are carrying out their research. But if there is no institutionalization of the field, after those scholars retire, as they inevitably will, after they pass on to other things, as they inevitably will, a field can die out. And therefore, we needed to have the ALA function as an institution in dialogue with other institutions, like Professor LOKANGAKA has just said. We needed to have the ALA function as an institution that could be a place to defend the interests of African literary studies and African diasporic literary studies, no matter what happened to the very famous scholars who founded the association at the beginning. And so attending to that institutionalization dimension was what really preoccupied me when I was president of the ALA. And one of the things, going back to what Professor Songolo said, one of the things that we started to do was to begin to track our membership. Began to track our membership so that I can say that in the time when I was president I became president in 2015 at the conference, the annual conference at Bayreuth, and then continued until the annual conference in Atlanta. In 2016, we had over 500 members, and because we had begun to take specific steps and measures to try and know who our members were, where they were located, how many people came to conferences, how many people sent in abstracts. These were things which we had not previously been able to do, obviously because the association was it was a young association, and the founders of the association were trying to spread the word about the study of African literature. So there wasn't necessarily the resources to do this kind of, keeping track of everything that is happening. By the time I became president of the association, the LA had moved from what Professor Songolo describes of having the conferences take place entirely on a campus to having the conferences convened by particular universities, but where most of the activity occurred in a hotel. We have since moved again, made further transition away from the way it was in 2015, 2016. But that was the way it was at the time. I will say more about this later on. The LA did have a number of very significant internal challenges that it was dealing with. So that while we were responding to events around the world, we were also quite preoccupied with very important problems that cropped up within the ALA that needed attention. And that also took up a lot of time. I'm going to stop there for now, and I will probably say more later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor ADEJUNMOBI. Professor NFAH-ABBENYI.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching at this moment, and thank you all for being here. I joined the ALA in 1992. I was a graduate student at McGill, and I was doing my dissertation on African women's writing. So the conference in New Orleans was on womanhood, African womanhood, and it coincided with the work that I was doing. And so I was lucky enough to get funding to travel to New Orleans from Montreal to attend the conference. And once I joined in 1992, I've stayed with the association since then. When I was president, to build on what Professor ADEJUNMOBI was just saying, trying to institutionalize the ALA was really important because we had many issues with bookkeeping. Bookkeeping was a big problem that I had to deal with when I was president because we had many problems to solve that needed records, and we couldn't find records and things like that. I will talk about those things later on. But it was a very vibrant organization when I became president. Um, Membership had moved from about 300 members to plus 600 when I was a president. So it was a good thing that many young scholars were becoming members of the ALA. And because many young scholars, both in Africa and here in Europe, were becoming members of the ALA, our numbers went up and the conferences were very vibrant because of that. So I became president at a time when there was a lot that was happening with young scholars joining the association and bringing that vibrancy to the association. But we also had other issues that we had to deal with that had to do with bookkeeping, that had to do with getting people to host the conference. That was one of the major issues, one of three major issues that I had to deal with as a president. We couldn't find people who would want to host the conference because of dwindling resources. Many people would say, I'm interested, but I might do this in 3 years. I'm interested, but I might do this in 2020. And we were in 2015, 2016, and we couldn't find people to host the conference. And so we had to think differently about how do we then host the conference if we don't have bids for the conference? And we had to think about, do we then sign contracts with hotels? And these are things that started under Teju, continued with MORADEWUN, and continued with me. And so that was a major issue, that we were not getting people bidding to host the conference. And so that was one major issue. The other major issue was record keeping, and another issue had to do with our financial and tax situation, which I wouldn't talk about right now. But I would say that when I was president, it was a very vibrant organization, and that the two previous presidents had put us on a path where we could only get better. I will stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Professor NFAH-ABBENYI. So some of you have already touched on the questions I was going to ask next. So I'll sort of fuse those questions into one, and you can answer them in the way you feel is best for you. What were some of the high points as well as some of the low points during your time as president? What were some of the things that were problems for you? What were some of the accomplishments, and how did you navigate those? And if you like, you can do the high points and the low points, or you can do one or the other. It's however you feel is appropriate. And as I said, some of you have touched on these already. So this is the place where, if you like, you can elaborate on some of the points you made earlier. So Professor Songolo. Professor Songolo? Yes.
Okay, I begin by saying that I need to apologize for my voice because I have a cold and I'm losing my voice. I've lost my voice. But some of the challenges early on, we have to remember that back in 1974, when the ALA started, I wasn't there yet. But by 1976, or even during my second term in 1992, the dominant issue was South Africa. And many of the people who were there at the beginning of the ALA and continued on for some time were from South Africa. They were, very well-known writers from South Africa. And a lot of the contentious issues that came up involved South Africa. And the problem was some wanted to deal with South Africa in a certain way and others in a different way. And that brought out in the open a lot of back and forth. There was not necessarily smooth or kind to each other. Those were some of the issues that a lot of us had to deal with, who were the leaders of the ALA. And the solutions were not always easy to find. It was often a matter of agreeing to disagree. That's one thing. Another thing was the organization itself. Professor ADEJUNMOBI talked about how later on during her presidency, not only were they tracking members, but they were also trying to institutionalize the association. One of the issues, and I think Professor LOSAMBE mentioned it already, one of the issues was relationship with the ASA. I will not go back to when African Americans left the ASA back in 1957 or 58, because we didn't exist then. But I think in the 1980s, we felt that the ASA was not taking us seriously. And that was another reason for the creation of the ALA, so that we could present our papers at the ASA, but also present our papers at our own organization. And I remember that I, as president, it must have been during my first term, I went to see I had a small delegation, I think there were 2 or 3 of us. We went to see the leadership of the ASA to ask for more space within which to talk about African literature as a subject, as the ASA talked about anthropology, about political science, history of Africa. And I remember that the president at the time mocked us. He said, well, you can always present papers, but you people in literature are too literally minded that you don't present enough of your papers so we can put them in the program. But in fact, we were, proposing a lot, and a lot of those papers were being refused. So those are some of the issues that we were dealing with, at least during my first term in 1982-83. And I will stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Professor Songolo. Professor LOSAMBE?
Yes, and during my tenure, again, one of the problems that, or one of the challenges that we had was the movement of our headquarters, because the headquarters was initially in California there, and the person who was in charge was retiring, and we had to look for another place, and we were very lucky to have Joseph, who was then at Harvard College, and at that time it happened to be that we have a very nice lady, Nigerian lady, who became the president, I think, of the university, of the college there. And so she helped us, and in the end, we were able to relocate our headquarters there. And since then, they have done an excellent job. But also we had, I remember the meeting we had there, the first meeting, we had to start also organizing on how to have our archival, very solid archival sites, the interviews that were conducted over the years, and the other document, the conference and proceedings, how to store them before we digitized everything. And so that was one of the things that really preoccupied us during that time over my presidency, apart again from the situation where we had to defend to a certain extent the relevance of our discipline within the American academy, or it became really a major problem. People were losing jobs at a certain colleges, and we had to devote a lot of attention to that. I remember at a certain point I had to start attending also, because I happened to be the chair of the Department of English, and so I started attending the Association of Department Chairs of English, where I met really a lot of hostility. You could find some speakers talking about what they call the fragmentation of English studies because of African literature, Caribbean literature, and others. And so those spaces we had really to engage scholarly, our colleagues, in order to influence policies, to make sure that we have that space. But again, as I suggested, I had to give my presidential address was centered on that as well. And also we thought was, again, just as ALIKO has just said, that disengaging from African studies was not necessarily a good idea, even if they treated us badly, but we could go back there. So the way we tried to solve that problem was, again, as I said, Teju, the late Teju, at a certain point, we had a chat, and he suggested that I should organize a major panel there so that we can then try to mark our return and start engaging there. When, especially that year, I think he became the program coordinator with the ADEJUNMOBI. And so we were finding our way back to the ESC. But at a certain point, you had also some scholars, including some prominent African scholars, then declaring already the demise of post-colonialism. And so African literature being taught also under that rubric. We thought that we had again to engage in a scholarly way that area, that space, in order to make sure that our relevance is always, continued, it's maintained. And so we had to organize a major panel on what I called post-colonialism and globalism, where we had Gikandi, Quaison, Jefo, Eileen, and Ken Harrow. And the debate really, it was it led us into a very good debate. So we had all those challenges, but then we had to address them both scholarly as well as politically, as we had as we are an activist organization. And so during my tenure, the organization, again, as Teju has, as Deum and Joyce have just said, at that time, we were making the best of what we could do, but then institutional organization really was still a little bit scanty, and it came. We were more concerned about even our own existence in the academic space within the Western world. And so those are some of the challenges that we had to face during my tenure. I come back again later on with other things. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor LOSAMBE. Professor ADEJUNMOBI.
Thank you again. Following up on what my colleagues have said, it was important to defend the study of African literature. And we needed to do so that there would be jobs advertised for positions in African literature, so that there would be students admitted to PhD programs to focus on African literature, so that those who did graduate with a PhD in African literature would easily find mentors. They would easily find people to write letters of recommendation for them. They would find people to assess them for tenure. In order for all of these things to happen, they needed to be able to publish their articles in journals. They needed to be able to publish books. There needed to be an association that could defend the interest of African literary and cultural studies. And this was really one of the many things that preoccupied me when I was president of the ALA, and I think a number of the presidents before I became president, and certainly those who became presidents after me. As we were trying to do that, coming to challenges, we found that the ALA exists, certainly in the United States, as a legal entity and a financial entity, which means that we are bound by certain laws. And it turned out that because we are professors of literature, after all, and cultural studies, we don't have, training in in financial matters. It turned out that we had not been doing a good job of keeping our financial records, and we had actually defaulted on our obligations to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service of the United States, and this was a failing that was discovered under the person who was president before I was president, Teju Olanio, the late Teju Olanio. And he began, trying to resolve that. And then when I became president, I, was confronted with this problem. And honestly, it took the entire space of my presidency. I was, having to read up on the, all of the provisions of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and become educated about all of these financial matters. The matters were not resolved under me, and they continued into the presidency of Professor NFAH-ABBENYI, and I'm sure she will have more to say about that. So that was a major problem that confronted me, because while I was president, because if we didn't resolve it, of course, and we fell foul of the laws of the United States, the government would be in its right to shut down the associations. So it was something that we needed to attend to. The conveners who who were helping to organize our conferences, they ran into financial problems as well that needed solving. They ran into financial problems. So at the 2015 conference in Bayreuth, Germany, there were some financial problems that cropped up at the very end, which we had to try and resolve. At the 2016 conference, and that goes into the presidency of Professor NFAH-ABBENYI, we found that the 2016 conference also ended up in debt. So the ALA needed to try and resolve that. So there were quite a few challenges, quite a few financial challenges that cropped up. In terms of accomplishments, things that were accomplished while I was president, we did make significant progress on being able to keep track of our membership, and we gradually began to move our membership records online. It wasn't fully completed at the time when I became, during the time when I was president, but at least we began that process of moving our records online. And for those who are watching and who might be thinking, why was it important to track our membership? We needed to track our membership so that we would know who was paying membership dues and who is not. And with the membership dues, we were then able to assist those who would convene our annual conferences. So it was really important for us to be able, because the annual conferences, there may have been a time in the past when universities were generous in allowing an association like ours to use their premises to organize a conference. By 2015, that was no longer the case. Universities were not that generous anymore. And so we needed to make sure that each time we organized a conference, we didn't end up in debt. And of course, it was important to organize a conference, in particular for our graduate students and our early career members, so that they would have a venue where they could present the results of their research, especially as the opportunity to present their research at the African Studies Association conferences in the United States was somewhat limited. And even at the Modern Language Association of America, the opportunities were somewhat limited. It was really important to protect the conference and to make sure that the conferences were financially viable and would, the conferences were financially viable, and lots of people would be able to come and present their work. So in terms of accomplishments, I'm happy that we made progress in that direction. And the last thing I will mention in terms of accomplishments was that the ALA from its early days had a bulletin, and in 1998, the ALA bulletin, in 1998, the bulletin was taken over by our senior colleague, Professor Abiose Porter, and he did so much work on that, and he kept the bulletin going, and until 2007, when he worked with the president at the time and transitioned the ALA bulletin into the Journal of the African Literature Association. And then he continued work on that, making sure that we were able to publish it. But it was very time consuming. It was very expensive for the association to keep publishing the journal. And luckily for us, a number of major publishers began to take an interest in the Journal of the African Literature Association. In particular, Taylor and Francis, our current publishers, Routledge, Taylor and Francis, and they approached us, and the matter was discussed extensively in the EC. And during the time I was president, the ALA signed its first contract with Taylor and Francis. So the Taylor and Francis would become the publisher for the Journal of the African Literature Association. That brought a lot of advantages for us. It meant that the articles that were published in the Journal of the African Literature Association would be more easily discoverable online. They would be more frequently cited, and the work of our colleagues would become known within the wider field of literary studies. So this was something that happened while I was president, and I think which has benefited the association and which has benefited our members who have an opportunity to publish their work in a journal that is recognized across the world. I want to seize the opportunity again to thank the person who really laid the foundation for JALA, and that is Professor Abiose Porter. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor ADEJUNMOBI. Professor NFAH-ABBENYI.
Thank you. One of the things that Professor ADEJUNMOBI didn't mention was when she was president, she actually passed the Constitution and policy committee. I was chairing that committee. She asked us to do a major overhaul of the handbook, and there was a lot that had to be done, to bring the handbook up to date, many revisions, and so it took half a year for the committee to work on that major overhaul of the handbook and to bring it up to date. And if you look at the handbook itself, you can see listed there all the things that were done, to bring the handbook up to date. So I chaired that committee, and then when I became a president, the financial issues that she just mentioned they got worse. For one, our taxes had not been filed from 2010 to 2014. When Professor Kamara Mohammed was looking for the documents, to get the documents from the previous treasurer it took a long time to get those documents. And so when he finally got the documents, that we discovered the letter that had been sent. The IRS had been sending many letters warning us that we're going to lose our status because we had not been filing taxes. And then they finally sent a letter that said that we had lost our tax exempt status. It's after that discovery of that letter that we had lost our status that we then had to find ways to get back into compliance, and it was a nightmare. I have never filed my taxes personally in this country. I've never done that because I always pay someone to do it. But because we all are volunteers of the ALA for the work that we do, I had to, like, as Professor ADEJUNMOBI said, reading IRS documents. I mean, I spent my entire fall semester of 2016 reading and reading and reading through IRS documents. Because one, we first had to explain what was it. The IRS asked us for a reasonable cost of a statement, where we had to say why, we had not filed taxes and why we lost our status. That was the first thing. After that, the IRS sent us 2 other information request letters asking for different things. And what we had to do first was to, file the taxes from 2010 to 2015. So we had to hire a firm, and they filed those taxes from 2010 to 2015. That was just the first part of the job that we had to do. When we did that, then we had to get another firm. The fact was the IRS wanted an audit. So the firm that had done the 5 years of our taxes didn't want to do the audit. So we had to get a different firm to file the 2016 taxes and to do the audit. In the process of doing the audit, we discovered that even though we had filed taxes with the state of New York, the state of New York let us know, they returned our tax filings to let us know that we were not registered as a charitable organization in the state of New York. That was something else that we had to do. We had to file something that they call the CAR 500. And so we had to file that to become a charitable organization in the state of New York before we could file taxes in the state of New York, because we were headquartered in the state of New York. And because our organization also has participants that come from all over the world, we had to file something called the Form 1023, something that is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, because we had to prove that we were not making money from any foreign governments and that foreign governments didn't have anything to do with our organization. So the point that I'm trying to make is that because we are all volunteers, there are many things that escape us that we didn't know about, and we had to take care of all of these things. And so that fall semester of 2016 was a total nightmare. On top of that, we were not getting any bids for future conferences. We reached out to many people who were not getting bids for future conferences. So the problem was, if we don't get bids, how are we going to run conferences after the Yale conference that took place in 2017? So we had to confront that problem, and we had to confront all the financial problems that we had to deal with, our taxes, filing for with the state of New York that we're a charitable organization, and also getting an edit done. We ended up spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And remember, we are a young organization. We don't have a lot of money, but we had to spend all of that money to come into compliance. But then we were not reinstated. Our 501(c) status wasn't reinstated, and we were getting very nervous because Yale, the conference in Yale was coming up, and Yale, the university was threatening to withdraw their sponsorship if we did not have the 501(c) status, because it was only on that basis that they could give them money. So we're really getting very nervous. And finally, in January of 2017, we got reinstated as a 501(c), and that was just wonderful that we got it in January, and we were now ready for the conference, and we sent those documents to Yale. We had our tax exempt status, and that they could work with that. And so that was a huge relief that we got our status back. In time for the conference to take place at Yale. But we still had the problem of what are we going to do now that we don't have any host for the next 4 years? How are we going to have our conference now that we don't have any host for the next 4 years? The closest that we came to was a colleague at Northwestern offering to maybe host it in 2020. So we had 4 years and we had no idea what was going to happen. That's when myself and the two previous presidents, MORADEWUN and Teju, that's when we sat down and we penned an open letter to the EC about all of these things that had been happening, what had happened with our finances, what had happened with our taxes, and that we need to think about how do we then host the next conference. And that's when we had a conversation at the ASA with the ASA. They had started what they called, they were giving, what status were they giving to, Professor ADEJUNMOBI, can you remind me what
affiliate? Was it affiliate?
Yeah, affiliate, yes, affiliate organizations. Yes, thank you very much. And so they were offering affiliate status to other organizations within the ASA. And one of the benefits of being an affiliate organization was that the ASA, you maintain your autonomy, but the ASA then would be able to do your taxes and all of that. And we were at a point where, because we didn't know how we're going to host the next conferences for the next 3 years, we said we could ask the membership at the ALA, can we become an affiliate organization of the ASA so that, all of these financial issues that we've been dealing with, that part of it will be taken care of by the ASA. It was just a suggestion, but we did lay out all the problems that we had, beginning with Atlanta, where we had to pay half of the $17,000 that the conveners in Atlanta owed, where we had paid money in Bayreuth, where we had paid all this money, for the tax matters. And so we made a proposal to the membership. Can we consider becoming an affiliate organization? The association decided at the conference in 2017 not to do that, which was fine. But, it didn't take away from the fact that the three of us submitted that letter in good faith, given that the ALA was at a crossroads at the time, and we were just trying to find solutions for the problem. So my high point was also my really low point. Dealing with the IRS for me was a total nightmare. It was a total nightmare. But I was so happy and relieved when we got that letter at the end of January that we had been reinstated as a tax-exempt institution, and that was the best thing, the best news that we could have had. And so I was very happy with that we got back into compliance with the state, and that because of that problem, we also learned a lot about how to move forward with our finances, with our taxes, how to deal with the Office of Foreign Assets Control. If anything were to arise, we will know that there are certain things that we cannot do because of the Office of Foreign Assets Control. So we learned a lot of things that were really good for the organization. So I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor NFAH-ABBENYI. At this point, we can open up the roundtable to questions from the audience. If you would post your questions into the chat, I can read them out. And if you would like to direct it to a specific person, please name them. If not, any of our panelists would be happy to respond. So while we're waiting, yes, here we are. Okay. So here is a question from Adimola Adesola. While you were president, I'm guessing this is to everyone. While you were president, did any of you feel compelled to have the ALA conference take place somewhere on the African continent? In other words, was rotating the conference between North America and Africa of any concern to any of you? And if so, what challenges made that rotation impossible if you did try? And anyone of the esteemed panelists is welcome to respond.
Sorry. May I say something? If I remember correctly, the issue of holding a conference in Africa was always there.
Yeah.
Back in 1994 or 95, there was a proposal. There were actually two proposals. One to go to Ghana, one to go to South Africa. And I think Ghana happened before South Africa. South Africa didn't happen until 2014. But I believe we have been in Ghana twice, and we have been in Senegal at least once. So the concern was always there.
Yeah.
Because we were always an organization that was listening to what was happening on the continent. So, and, you know, for a while, we tried to go there every 5 years or so. It didn't always happen, but it was certainly something that was very important to us.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that. Oh, am I there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yes, so when again we were struggling about where to have the next conference, when I was about after the Methodist, I think the Texas conference. At the Texas conference, then we wanted really to go back to Africa after Ghana. And then from Nigeria, we had we have some interest. Professor Emeritus was working with a group for Suka, and then Nala wanted the Kwara State was also working. And so we were really, all of us were working towards us, waiting, very enthusiastic. And in the end, it became clearly where Professor, he really told us that, look, the Kwara option is nowhere. There is nothing in matches. The person who wanted to host it was very much interested in it. The logistics and many other things were not in place. And so that fell apart. And the other one, the menu never came really to a proposal. So everything was just going around and around and around until we had to look for another venue within the United States. So that has been really, that Nigerian option has been there forever, and then a discussion will be taking place, but we haven't never had a concrete proposal, because for us to go somewhere like in Kenya, we have to have a proposal that conforms to our guidelines and make sure that the conference will take place. But we never had anything like that, and it was very unfortunate during our time. And it was during that conference that actually we received the news of the passing of Chinua Achebe, when we were in the middle of an executive meeting during that time, and we thought that could be something that could take us there as an opportunity for us to celebrate also his life at the end that way, and but it never happened.
Yes, I would like to add to what my colleagues have said, to say that there has always been an interest in hosting the conference on the African continent, and we're all excited that we're going to be in Nairobi in 2025, which is wonderful to celebrate the anniversary of the association and to be on the African continent. There have been a number of challenges. Conferences cost money.
Yeah.
And we have to get the money from somewhere. And frequently our sister organizations and universities on the African continent do not have the money. Up until around 2015, 2016, what our handbook said was that if you are going to submit a bid to host the annual conference, you need to show that you have the sum of $10,000 available. Because there are rooms to be reserved, there's audiovisual, there are all kinds of logistical things that have to be dealt with. We've moved away from that system because even universities in the United States, in North America, were no longer willing to make those kinds of resources available. And there weren't organizations to which we could apply for that kind of funding. But which now means that hosting the conference depends on the membership dues and conference registration fees that are paid by those who are going to attend. Now, we know that our colleagues on the African continent, we cannot be asking them to be paying, outrageous sums as registration fee for a conference and and membership dues, which means that essentially it is the members outside the African continent who are going to carry the financial burden of the conference. This also means that we have to be very mindful as we're trying to organize a conference. We need to go to a place where we can bring many of those members so they can pay so that we can organize the conference. It has to be a place that has the basic resources that we need. And it has to be a place where we are free to discuss all the subjects that we would like to discuss, which is not always possible in a number of particular sites. So if the ALA hasn't organized its conferences more frequently on the African continent, it's not for a lack of a will or a desire to do so. We actually do desire to do so, but getting together all the logistics, and especially the financial element, this has proved to be quite challenging over the years. The year before I became president, we had the conference in Johannesburg. And I recall it took like about 6 years or something to organize that conference in Johannesburg. It took, and that's bearing in mind that the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa actually did have, quite a few resources. They had a lot of what was needed. It took about 6 years to get it off the ground. So it's not for lack of will. Really, the president and the EC have wanted to do so, but there's a financial element. There's also security elements. In some places, it's not necessarily easy to go. So these are all the issues that have cropped up. I'm hoping that in the future, we'll be able to organize more conferences on the African continent, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we have these conversations every year in the EC. Every year. We talk about it all the time. And I remember when I was president, there were at least colleagues from 3 different African countries who expressed, interest in hosting, the ALA. But when they went and looked at the logistics, what it would cost, and they said, look, we've looked into the logistics and we just can't do it. It's not that they are not interested, but when they look into the logistics and they say, we just can't do it, we still have to plan the conference one way or another. So really something that one thinks about all the time. We feel the same way as the question that is in the chat right now, but it's just that, most of the times financially and logistically, when people express interest and they go into the details of what it will take, then they will later on say, we've looked into it and we just can't do it. And there's nothing we can do at that point but plan the next one.
Yeah, if I may add something that really doesn't have anything to do with Africa, but being outside of the United States. I think the first 2 conferences that we had outside was the one in Toronto in 1992, which was immediately followed by Guadeloupe. And one might say that Guadeloupe was a testing ground for us more than Toronto. Toronto was as easy as the United States. But I remember that when we went there, by the way, I was president and co-organizer with Micheline Rees-Maximin, Eileen Julian, and I forget the third person. But we would go to begin preparing for the conference. And I remember the last trip I went on was just 2 weeks before the conference happened. And the person that we were relying on, as he and I were holding the final meeting, asked me this question: when is it that you're holding this conference? After a year of working together on it. So there are many, many challenges when you have to go outside of the US with the ALA. I mean, we're getting used to it now, but it wasn't always easy.
Thank you. Other questions? I do see a follow-up from Ademola Adesola, but I do think that the question has already been answered by the panelists. So other people, any other? There don't seem to be more questions, but while people are thinking about it, this is, oh, there is one. Okay. So this is directed to, this is from Martha Ndakalo, and it's directed to Professor LOSAMBE. Professor LOSAMBE, you mentioned in your opening comments that you hope to speak to the state of the discipline. Could you speak to that now?
Yes, I think that more recently there have been a number of openings again, as I have been writing letters of recommendations, and a new interest has come again. After some time, that's how it happens. There is a lull, and then we have to again start making sure that we are well represented here and there, because as we know, at the MLA, most of the policies that we see in our institutions governing language and the literature, most of those are policies that then affect our disciplines and the teaching, especially in the language and the literature, emanated from the MLA. And so when most of the policies you see at the MLA also come from the Association of Department Chairs. That association brings together the foreign languages and English. And so in my experience in that association is that most of those recommendations coming from there and the way they conceptualize things there just filter into the MLA. And one of the things that we did very well was to have those fora. We have a forum, the African literature to the 1990 and African literature after. And every year we are well represented there. Juliana is probably the president of one of them, and Tanure, myself, and others are members of another one. And so we engage the discussions taking place there, and the people coming in order, in fact, to have those fora, we had to fight people who wanted to have South Africa as different from African literature or the rest of Africa, consistent with the way South Africa was always presenting itself during apartheid, as if they were not a part of Africa. So we had to fight to have to make sure that the totality of African literature is represented and then periodized that way. And so once we have that dialogue itself, it creates a situation where departments start now again having openings in African, not even African literature, post-colonial literature and African literature, and all. So that recently I have seen a really encouraging signs of many positions in different departments is that English, European languages, or or African American, African studies, but the combinations very often are coming. So it is as a result of our, again, our existence. We had it at a certain point when we saw that we were being squeezed. We had also to scholarly engage. And again, as a result of that, if you see most of the guides that we have been working on, those anthologies, as you see, Deyum and CAROLE, Guides to African Literature, Companion to African Literature, and Diasporic. Recently, we received even from the MLA a request that we should present our book for a prize because they have read it and things. And so these are the scholarly engagements that then continue to have an impact on the existence, on how we maintain, how legitimately, we engage, we occupy that space as part of the vibrant literary vibrant literary traditions within the diaspora or from there. So it has been really, I think it's more encouraging now than what it was during that time. And many of you, just like Martha, you know that there are many positions coming here and there, and the young scholars now are getting really positions as they graduate with PhDs from different universities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Losambe. There is one more question from Sam Zadi. I was wondering if someone could talk a little bit about late Professor Teju's contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that and maybe come back to the question of the state of the discipline. Teju Professor Olanyo made immeasurable contributions to the association and really was one of the early figures to see that the association needed to be institutionalized in particular ways. Mm-hmm. And I'll mention one of the most important contributions that he made. One of the most important contributions that he made several, was realizing that the association needed to have awards that, acknowledged the scholarly work that was being done by members of the association and by scholars who are working in African literature in general. Right from the beginning, the ALA has seen itself as an activist association, and it's been an activist association. At the same time, you have members who are working in departments in various universities across the world who are doing important work as scholars, and that work is not being acknowledged. It's only recently that an organization like the MLA instituted a prize that would recognize work done in African literary studies. They didn't have any such thing. And so Teju said, how do we have an association? This is our work. This is what we are doing. And we are the best qualified to recognize important work that is being done in African literary and cultural studies. We need to have this, we need to have awards. And I remember the first conference where he spoke about it during the business meeting, and the people didn't seem very interested. They weren't persuaded that this was an important thing, but he kept on at it. And eventually, this is the reason why today we have, a best book award. This is the reason why we have a first book award. This is the reason why we have an award for the best article published by a graduate student. It is because he kept on pushing and said, we need to have these awards which recognize our scholarly and professional work that we are carrying out. So this was one of the areas where he made a big difference. And briefly, I'd also like to say something small about the question of the state of the discipline. As Professor Lokangaka has just said, the discipline keeps evolving. And one of the things that we want to be doing at the ALA, and especially at our annual conferences, is putting our finger on the pulse of the discipline. Where is the discipline today? Right? a few years ago, I would have said that if you're completing your PhD and you're applying for a job in North America, you're not necessarily going to say, I'm a scholar of African literature, because there weren't many jobs for scholars in African literature. There were jobs for global Anglophone. Before that, there were jobs for post-colonial. Before that, there were jobs for other things, but there weren't jobs for African literature specifically. As Professor LOKANGAKA has said, we have a couple more now. So the situation is looking up, but nonetheless, this discipline keeps changing. And those of us whose work is primarily in African literary and cultural studies, we do need a space where we are able to figure out where the discipline is. And when I say the discipline, I mean literary studies in general and cultural studies, where it is and how we can best help, especially our graduate students and our early career professionals, navigate the discipline so that they are able to advance in their career, so that you don't feel like, oh, I finished this PhD and I can't get a job, which would be very, that would be very, very sad if that happened. So paying attention to the evolution of the discipline, engaging with sister organizations in the way that has been mentioned is very, very important, so that we make sure that there's always an opening for those who are coming along. So we make sure that even if some of us retire, other people will be hired to replace us. But in order for that to happen, we do need to pay attention to what is happening to the discipline. I'm going to stop there. Maybe other people have something to say about Teju and his contribution.
Yeah, I can only add that Professor Olaniyan did a lot of, behind the scenes work with Routledge. As members, we had no idea of how much time and work and correspondence he put into getting the deal with Routledge come alive. And then he became the first, editor-in-chief of the journal. And he set standards that remain with us today that we can all be proud of. And I think that's a wonderful thing that he did. And I also like the fact that he reached out to scholars in the field about guest editing special issues on specific topics. And by doing that, it also enriched the kinds of articles that JALA was publishing. So it's a good thing that we have those special issues that can look at a specific country or a specific issue. And he was really instrumental in making that happen. And I very much appreciate the energy that he had behind the scenes to get these things come alive for us to work with right now. So that's just all I wanted to add about Professor Olaniyan.
Yeah, I wanted also to add something that, and he did it, so he was so much devoted to both the scholarship, the flourishing of the discipline, as well as the organization of the ALA, that at a certain point, at the expense sometimes of his own work. I knew that for a long time he was working on a book on a cartoon and others, and all the time, as we were corresponding, there was a time he wanted me to do a special issue on the Congolese, new Congolese literature. And I was saying, oh, Teju, I'm trying to finish a book. He said, look, sometimes you have to shelf that. And you see what, and I said, yeah, you're right. I think sometimes we have to wait. So he was always a motivating, factor in making sure that at his own, almost at the expense of his own scholarship and others, but he wanted to do. And even the lecture that he gave in Johannesburg, that a challenge has led to many people engaging a lot more into the theory of African literature above, besides the practical criticism and others, trying to look at, to move about the way we look at our literature and things like that. So he was always really a source of inspiration and also an encouraging factor in making sure that our discipline moves, and we miss him a lot really for that. Even the digital system, when he became president, most of the development, African the association in the organization, organizational in terms of technology, really started taking off at that point, really, and it was very much astute.
Yeah, let me just add something to that, because Teju was my colleague and my friend at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He came there in 2001. In 2004, I asked him to help me organize the 2004 conference, ALA conference. And he poured himself into the work of that, helping to organize all kinds of things. I remember that at the conference, one of the things that we used to do, I don't know if we still do them, I asked him to read the names of all the presidents of the ALA until that point. And then he chided me and said, how come you were twice president of the ALA? And I said, you know, in those days, not many people wanted to be. But he was extremely, extremely involved in the organization of that conference, which I think was extremely successful in 2004. Yeah, I want to, just as a footnote, I'm watching the logo of the ALA in the left corner of our screen. And I think most people don't know how that came about. I found an artist I had at home, the Adinkra symbols, and I found an artist to make a proposal of what could become the ALA logo. I was doing that in 1981 as I was preparing to become the president. In those days, the vice president did not automatically succeed to the presidency. You had to have separate elections. And I was so confident that I would become president, I decided to have 3 logos discussed at the meeting, the annual meeting. And it took, as usual, it took very long to get the resolution to it. But in the end, this one won the vote of the membership. That was then, well, just one step back, I did not win the presidency. Yeah, the late Emil Snyder won the presidency and started his presidency with that logo. But anyway, that's I forgot to mention that when we were talking about things that we did while we were presidents.
With that, I would say we will let Professor Songolo have the last word here. He is, after all, our esteemed elder on this panel. And I am fully aware that time is of the essence. So before we end here, I'd just like to remind everyone that this is the last of our lecture series. First of all, I would, for this year, however, we will have the next of our series on January the 24th. The details will be forthcoming. I would like to also thank all our panelists for their time and effort. If you're like me, you certainly learned a lot about the struggles and commitment that it took from all the people on this panel to make ALA the way it is now. And we, as the people who came afterwards, are still reaping their benefits. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you've done. And I also want to thank you for being here today. Before final note, if you haven't already done so, please submit an abstract for the conference in Kenya. The last date for turning in your abstract is December the 2nd. So there are a few days left, but we would like to hear from you. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. And with this, we will end our session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joya.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thanks.